Hello everyone, my name is Mihályfalvi Zsófia and I am an open source compliance consultant at Accenture in Cluj, Romania. Let's start with a lie. Most of you probably know the most common lies people tell, and one of them is I have read and agreed to the terms and conditions. This is my job, this is what I do every day. I actually read the terms and conditions. Let's dig into more serious things. Most of you have probably heard about open source, and most of you probably know that it's the future and it will probably change the world on some level. Even though it is becoming more and more widespread, people are afraid to use it. Why? Because they don't know what they're dealing with exactly. Well, you're in luck because that's why I'm here today. I will talk to you about what open source is, about some software licenses, OSS compliance, and I will give you some examples and interesting cases. Let's start with some basics. Even though you might be familiar with some terms related to OSS or licensing, I think that it is necessary to make a short introduction. And that's why I will just read to you the official definition of OSS, which is given to us by the Open Source Initiative, which has a birthday, by the way, this year, the 20th, hence the beer on the presentation. So here it goes. Generally, open source software is software that can be freely accessed, used, changed, and shared in modified and unmodified form by anyone. Open source software is made by many people and distributed under licenses that comply with the open source definition. Let's move on after this to more deep topic. I will talk to you about the open source licenses a little bit. You probably have seen these abbreviations in your source code, BSD, MIT, GPL, right? And you must have wondered, what are these things? What are these comments in my source code? Why are they there? What is their purpose? A software license is a legally binding document, actually, which provides some guidelines on how software can be used, distributed, and modified. And please remember these three words, because these are the most important rights that open source licenses give us. These licenses were created to try and control the usage of OSS and in a way that it should be beneficial to every user. So their goal is not to stop you from using OSS or stop you from contributing to OSS projects. They just want to create a controlled environment. Based on the main rights which OSS gives us, a categorization of licenses I think that might be useful to you. I think that developers should know their licenses as a chef knows his knives. Maybe not on that level, but I think that you should know not to cut not to cut meat with a fish knife, for example. So let's see these basic rights. I will just show them to you. I will not get into it very deeply. So these are the following. You have the right to retain the copyright, to display your code, to perform, to copy, modify, distribute, and sublicense. The first and most important categorization of licenses is made based upon Copyleft. Yes, you heard me right, it's Copyleft. Have you ever heard of this term? If not, you must have heard about copyright, and I would like to start with that before we get into Copyleft. Copyright is a legal right, as you probably know, which is given to you immediately as you create the work. These rights are exclusive to you, and give you the right to determine how others can use your work, or under what conditions can they contribute to it. And this is where the licenses come into the picture. So based on this, let's talk about Copyleft a little bit. Copyleft is based on copyright, actually. It uses parts of the copyright law, and it achieves a weird result. It is the legal protection of the users rather than the authors. So Copyleft actually protects the user. This effect requires that all modified, extended, and derived versions of the copylefted program to be copylefted as well. They should have the same rights as the original code. In English, this means that if a software that you want to use, modify, or distribute is under a copyleft license, you may not release it under any other license. You must obey the same conditions you received it under. This is also called the hereditary effect, or the viral effect, because it spreads like a virus from software to software. This rule protects both developers who avoid facing a proprietized competition of the project, and both the users who can be sure that they will have all freedoms, not only in the present version of their software, but all future enhanced versions. So let's talk about an easier categorization of these licenses, which is permissive and restrictive licenses. The permissive license, as it says in the name, have minimal requirements. These are, for example, the MIT license, the BSD, the Apache. You must have heard of some of these licenses. And there are the restrictive licenses who have more specific requirements when it comes to redistribution, for example. These are the GPL, the MPL, and the Eclipse public license, to name a few. So these were the basic stuff that everyone should know before dealing with OSS. And now that your initiation into the licensing world has been made, let's talk about compliance. There are some questions that you must have in your mind when you are thinking about using a source code, or even writing one, as you probably do so. So let's take these questions and try to answer them. Can open source licenses be used in your code? What happens when you don't use a license? Well, of course, you can use any license you want to in your software. The choice depends on what kind of software you are using and what do you want to achieve by distributing your software. Basically, once you've created the work, this is automatically copyrighted to you, as I mentioned before. This means that no one has any right to do anything with your work unless you let them to. If you decide on using a license for your work, you're actually telling people what they can and cannot do with your software. The moment you want to enter the world of OSS, it is advised that you pick a license for your code. The whole point of OSS is an open development system for programmers, so to say, and the opportunity for them to give back to the community. It is much easier when a developer knows that what he can or cannot do with the software than to keep emailing you and keep asking about the usage of your software. So this means that practically you're doing yourself a favor when you are licensing your work. The next question is, how should you use open source software in the development of your project or product? I think that this is the most burning question people ask themselves. You are developers, you create software, you write code. It is your job to be aware of what's out there. You probably use open source on a daily basis. You must be familiar with Maven, GitHub, SourceForge. And have you ever wondered about the source code you are downloading from there and you are probably modifying and redistributing? Have you ever checked the license file or the libraries? Your code contains big amount of licensing information. This is usually given in a comment inside some of your files, for example, the header files, if you take a look. And you can also find licensing information about your source code on the internet. You just have to know where to look for it. Usually on these websites you can find some licensing info. And now I will show you an example of how this license file looks. It's an easy one, you probably know it. It's Notepad++, version 7.6. And this is how the source code looks. You can see the libraries, some files, and there is a file that is called license, of course. And if you open this file, you can see the following text. It is about the copying of your file, it is about licensing terms, and usually you have the whole text of the license also listed in the file so that you know what the whole thing is about. So you can just, in your next source code, you can just check this or just put it there yourself. That's not all though. Due to the fact that you have a lot of licensing information in your source code, you have to pay extra attention. They might not be simple licenses, or they might be incompatible with one another. This can cause inconveniences, not just for you, but for others as well. So for example, if you have a license that bears information which says that the code you want to use, or just that one file you want to use from a source code cannot be distributed or cannot be used for commercial use, then what do? It is a big problem. If you stumble upon these cases and ignore them totally without discussing with, for example, your legal team, then you might be in trouble. So you have to be aware. Plus, there are some people out there who are always alert and seek out these people who are not compliant with some of the licenses. I will talk to you about one of these cases later on. In conclusion, it is encouraged to use open source in your product or your project, but you should be aware what you're using, so you should just analyze first the code that you are downloading. Well, usually developers don't care about licensing, that is the truth. Some of them haven't even heard about licensing probably, or if they have, their knowledge is not extensive enough. They probably know about the MIT and the LGPL, GPL, but that is not all there is to it. As I explained before, there are a lot of licenses out there. Some of them are tricky, some of them not, but in any case, people need to be aware. There are some companies who are already using systems that can be helpful for detecting these dangerous licenses, so to say, and this is essential. So I am not a developer or a software architect or a project manager, but I have seen during my time at Accenture that I think I have seen everything to this point. So if you miss some of these requirements, some of these licenses in the source code, because you actually didn't read the terms and conditions, then you or the company you created the software for might be in trouble. So I gathered some advice for you, so you can be sure of how to use your software. First of all, you should evaluate the applicability of your licenses. So you should know your components. What are you using? The build of your source code, the analysis. You can analyze source codes. There are a lot of tools out there which do this. You should monitor the software that you use. You should be in contact with your teams. You should know the license requirements because probably you downloaded the source code and you missed that it is under GPL and you didn't give the source code further. So that is a big problem. You should track the changes of your release because software licensing changes sometimes with a next release, so you should be always aware. And lastly, you should communicate with your legal team if you have one at your company. I have gathered 2 examples for you of components which I have been working on. First one is the Linux kernel. You must have heard about it. And just as an interesting fact, we found 1,900 licenses in the source code of Linux, 1,600 copyrights. And some of them were commercial licenses, some of them were trade secrets, and these cannot be redistributed, cannot be modified, used in any way. So this is why you should be careful when using or modifying software. The other one is Pillow 230. We found a file in this software that was taken from another program, which is called GIMP, which is licensed under GPL. So the guy, the author of that code, Federico Mena Quintero, actually we had to talk to him, and he agreed that we can relicense his file under Pillow license, which we actually needed. So you can find more information about this on GitHub if you search for it. Actually we had to talk to the guy because he didn't know what he was doing actually. So as a final note, I would like to present to you Patrick. Patrick is a guy, his name is Patrick McHardy, and he used to work at Linux. He's the author and the copyright holder of the NetFilter utility of the Linux kernel component. When he left the company, he started monitoring these authors who did not respect the requirements of the GPL. As you know, Linux is under the GPL version 2. So he tracked down these people who didn't contribute, didn't give his copyright back, and he threatened them with lawsuits. Allegedly, he made 50 threats like these. We can't know for sure because in Germany, where all this happened, these cases are not public. But he managed to agree with these guys outside of court. But imagine what could have happened if he actually made it to court. But allegedly, he made millions by this little scandal, so to say. So this proves that it is always better to be compliant than to just ignore the license requirements. Okay, so thank you for bearing with me and for your attention. And please always take a few minutes and read those terms and conditions. Thank you.